all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com.
We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Andrew Patrick George Everett, who I'm going to call Everett because he also goes by APDG. That's why Everett's easier. Everett, welcome to Veterans Radio.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Jim.
Well, I'll tell you what, an opinion piece that you wrote caught my attention. The opinion piece is titled, "The VA's Disability Evaluation is Failing Veterans." But before we get into the opinion piece, we should explain to our Veteran Radio listeners that you served in the Air Force from 1999 to 2002. You told me you had, officially, you were a weather technician. Unofficially, they dragged you into operational planning, and you did a lot of support work for operational planning because, as you noted, weather affects everything. Do I have that right?
Fundamentally, yes, sir. And yeah, no, it's just a matter of it was borne out by the fact that I'm a reasonably decent writer. I was in high school. I ran my high school newspaper my senior year. So when I showed up to the Weather Hub and then showed up to the operations floor, they're like, "Oh, you can write. You've already gotten a commendation for that. Do we have a job for you?" Which led me writing the Synoptic Weather Bulletin, which then in turn helped lead to doing contingency operations oriented things because
Well, yeah, and you once you got out of service, you picked up an undergraduate degree. You've studied at Cornell. You currently are working on your master's in biomedical engineering at the University of Vermont, and also working on some medical coursework at the University of Washington. So, you not only write well, you're sort of an analytical guy. As an engineer, that's what I'd sort of expect. So with an emphasis, I think you feel that your emphasis is in the medical field. Is that right?
I mean, now it's been a matter of transition. Like, obviously, when I was younger, actually, when I got medicaled out of the service, my goal was to go into science and tech policy. And in order to do that, my goal was to go to grad school in engineering, but I ended up doing a more liberal artsy oriented undergrad because honestly, engineering undergrad, especially at the University of Washington, yeah, that's a no. Engineering undergrad is hard anyway, but in a quarter school like the University of Washington, it just becomes impossible. So I did a degree in econ, mostly for the orientation towards for the government sector things like public finance, taxation, policy, that sort of thing. And then my quote unquote real degree in undergrad was a math degree focusing on applied math.
Well, and I skipped over the fact that you've done consulting work with big national firms in the DC area. That we're not talking about any of that today. That doesn't really matter to us. But But what I'm trying to get established is that you've had real world experience with the VA disability system, and you've had sort of an opportunity from a higher level policy. Hey, engineering wise, there's a better way to do this, biomedical approach. That kind of is how this opinion piece came about. So why did you write it? Who did you write it for?
All right. So let's roll back to this summer. So the One Big Beautiful Bill passed, and it led to changes in federal student loan policy, which led to the first op-ed that I wrote for The Hill, which published late August, in particular how changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill led to impositions on veterans and certainly prior enlisted veterans like myself from being able to finance going to med school or law school without just with the way the student loan program has been severely cut. Now, having done that, and then I got an op-ed published in the Seattle Times for DUI enforcement in September, when the piece that dropped in the Washington Post in early October, the long form expose that was written by Craig Whitlock et al.
And that's the piece for our veteran radio listeners that claimed there's all kinds of bureaucracy and fraud in the VA disability payment system.
Indeed. So now, reading that, I was, one, annoyed, two, like nothing they claimed was technically incorrect, but they certainly, the focus was only on individual malefactors, that is to say, individual bad boys or girls, and didn't look at, and certainly made claims like about why veterans file secondary and supplemental conditions and things like that, not at all evaluating the fact that the reason why veterans do the things that they do regarding VA claims is because this is how the system's designed. Every veteran who has gone through this claims process, as I have more than once, they are well aware that it is easier to get from 0 to 90% than it is to get from 90 to 100. And the reason for that fundamentally is due to what's known as in mathematical terms as a product formula that the VA uses in order to try to prevent, because of course the logic makes sense from a certain point of view, but it doesn't.
Well,
fundamentally.
And part of that is, and the Washington Post article's been beat up by all kinds of people, and I'm more than glad to jump on the bandwagon of beating it up because it cherry-picked bad actors, as you point out.
Indeed.
And if you have 6.9 million disability beneficiaries, you can find a percentage or two who are going to be bad actors, and that's all they did. What they didn't do is really focus on the system. And that was what I thought was interesting about your op-ed article, is you sort of said, they're using an old approach here, and maybe you ought to rethink the approach, not pick on the veterans. So talk to us about that aspect.
All right. So there are several aspects that come into it. So the rating system and the percentage combinations and the whole thing that the VA uses was put out in 1945. It's encoded into the CFR, that is the Code of Federal Regulations, which in turn is based off of an old actuarial model. Actuarial mathematics is, of course, especially in applied mathematics, that deals towards figuring out things like life and health, the lengths of things and what have you. So how they built that formula is the assumption that all disability conditions for veterans were substantively independent, which is to say they are not physiologically or statistically correlated with any, which is to say related to anything else. Now, this was an approach that the actuarial industry and thus insurance companies moved away from starting in the 60s, and then by about middle of the Reagan administration, I think fundamentally the entire actuary and insurance industry had moved towards a more domain aware, which is to say a combination of disabilities that for like assessing percentage disabled, which is I don't like the term, but let's go with it.
And that right there is unique. I mean, Social Security, you're either 100% or you're zero. VA rates individual organs and body parts differently, as you say, without any correlation between, well, if I have this, I probably are going to get that, which also leads to your, you've talked about secondary conditions, because if I've got a bad hip, sooner or later I'm going to have a bad knee, aren't I?
Yep. And so, like, the vast majority of veterans, let's rewind a second. So a lot of veterans, especially a lot of post 9/11 veterans, myself included, have PTSD. I mean, obviously, it was working multiple deployments. For me, it was working in a 24-hour shop at a headquarters. Like, I mean, we each have our thing. And along with constantly rotating shift work or, inconsistent hours and everything else, and the various traumata of military service, people develop PTSD and or depression. People develop chronic pain elements from, having to bear a lot of weight sometimes. I mean, I wasn't a combat armed soldier, but those who carry 80, 90 pounds on their back for days, if not weeks at a time, there's a reason why their back, their knees, and everything goes bad. Now, these conditions tend to correlate, like PTSD and chronic pain, the correlation is above 50%. PTSD and apnea, the correlation is undeniably, like for all veterans, it's about 50%, a bit over. For younger veterans certainly in the post 9/11 realm, as well as a bit earlier, the correlation is about 2/3 of people with PTSD also have sleep apnea. And the Washington Post article, the first one as well as the second one they did, where they were questioning, well, why does apnea pay more than losing a limb or something? Well, going back to the way the old formula system that the VA uses to compute disabilities, like loss of a hand or a foot had a certain impairment. Loss of the entire arm or a leg had a bigger one. But whether or not your foot or your arm was impaired really didn't matter that much, except the ability to do certain physical tasks. PTSD, apnea, things like chronic pain, those affect sleep, affect cognition. They undeniably impact a whole bunch more things,
including work, right? When you're in pain or you can't sleep, you're not as effective in life the next day, and that's part of what this takes into account. But it's still using an old model, isn't it?
Yep. And it's one that, as I have said, the actuarial industry and everything else went away from. Now, with Congress and with the VA, the system fundamentally, it means well, but it wasn't well designed even at its time, but because, like with many things in government, the inertia carried over. I mean, it was President Reagan who once said that the closest thing to eternity is to immortality is a federal government program. And in this respect, he's right. Because so much of federal law is now built on this table, built on these assumptions, built on everything else, even if the U.S. wanted to try to move to a comparable system like the British or the Australians or the Canadians run, you can bolt things on but you cannot do a wholesale tear down and rebuild like they did.
And
realistically,
one of the things I want to read a sentence from your op-ed, which
sure.
says, and as you listen to this sentence, I'm thinking about, well, this is a 1945 model, and we thought about things like mental health a whole lot differently almost 100 years ago than we do today. You wrote, as a result, the system continues to undervalue cognitive, psychological, or fatigue-based disability relative to physical loss.
Indeed.
And that's just a societal reality between these 80 to 100-year difference point, isn't it?
Yes, sir. I mean, the state of the art for psychiatric condition for psychiatry and neurology was very, very minimal at the cut of World War II, and then and obviously with the Vietnam era and PTSD being formalized as a diagnosis and everything else, and with increase in neurological studies and knowledge of the brain and everything else, those things have been developed and are certainly way more is known, way more is advanced, but still they are discovering new things all the time. The brain, and both as a physical organ and as the seat of consciousness, what we are learning in medical research, which I do as my day job now, is undeniably growing all the time. And policy should hopefully be at least relatively informed by it to move along with it. But in this case, with limited exception, it by and large hasn't.
And one of the points you make of this system, which has its flaws, is that as a result, quote, regional offices measure performance by closure volume, not accuracy, and some offices grant claims twice the rate of others. That just adds additional confusion, and to some level, I guess, wouldn't you say, Everett, sort of gaming the system?
Well, certainly. I mean, so in my case, I have PTSD, I have apnea, I have a metabolic condition, all assessed as being service connected. So for which I get my 88%, so it rounds to 90. Now, which is funny because when discussing with friends who are veterans who live in other jurisdictions, and where I have similar levels of impairment to them for similar things, and yet they got their 100%. I mean, they got their 100% rating. I didn't. Now, I'm not belaboring. I'm not saying woe is me, but it then got me curious as to if my rating is different than theirs, then what studies exist as far as the relatively differential rates of closure and or a rating being granted. And apparently in this case, actually a bit unsurprisingly, VA did the bulk of that analysis themselves. They are well aware that whether or not you have representation, whether or not what region you're in makes a difference as far as whether or not your claim is accepted or not. And in my case, I am somebody who, over the last 21 and a half years as a civilian veteran, I have lived in the Seattle area. I have lived in the D.C. area, both in Maryland and Virginia, but it doesn't matter because they're all fundamentally that's all covered. I've lived in Philadelphia. I've lived in upstate New York. I've lived in Vermont. I've lived in multiple jurisdictions, and as a result, I have had assessments at various times done through various VA offices that, one, if I had a bit more stability, maybe I could have. But I don't want to.
But it should, as you say, it shouldn't be about where you live. It shouldn't be.
No, it shouldn't.
It shouldn't be about what regional office or what rater is. But if the system is so archaic that you can have such variability makes you wonder about the system. I want to have you comment about another line that you wrote that I found interesting, which was, quote, the VA must replace its independence-based math with a synergy-aware, domain-weighted model that advances the models inferred by the militaries of America's allies, including the UK, Canada, and Australia. So this doesn't have to be brand new, fresh ground that Congress plows. They have places they can look where maybe we would get better results for not only the government but also for all the veterans in terms of certainty. Right? Is that what you're telling me?
Functionally, yes. Now, as I was saying a bit earlier, ideally, it would be great if you could tear down and rebuild the entire system. That isn't a feasible option. Well, certainly not politically, but also functionally, because considering all the veterans who live with the system as it currently is, if the system was changed, that would require substantive reevaluations of everybody, and I don't think that could feasibly be done, certainly not in a short matter of time. So even though that would be the ideal, there are two ideas in practice which could be relatively easy implemented. One of which is either a change in the product formula that the VA uses that allows for a correlative factor between the various conditions, which mathematically would be easy, but then would require, and the way, and if implemented, would in no way decrease any veteran's rating and would either be the same or increase in all cases because of the multiplicative factor and the various mathy things that I will avoid, because I am sure most veterans do not want to hear a lecture on applied mathematics from me.
No, please, I wouldn't understand it. So keep broad.
So let's just take let's just say if you have let's just go with that 70% rating for PTSD and 50% rating for apnea, of which I am sure a non-trivial percentage of your listeners have. Now, that works out to 85% because of, the 70%, so you have the 30% remaining.
VA
and
math.
then
VA
math. So now if you had built in a correlative factor, that would work out to, even with those two, instead of 85, what's that work out to? About 93.2%-ish. And so that is to say you get a net gain of 7.2% or 8.2% because of building in a correlative factor, which should exist anyway. Now, as a practice, that would mean that you have a whole lot more veterans being pushed with a higher combined percentage. Arguably, it should happen that way anyway, but that also would require, rerunning the calculations for all 7+ million veterans. Not hard to do, but as a practical matter, the easiest thing to do would be to bolt on a functional tier system that says anything between 0 and 20%. Okay, like it minimal, and then 20, and then over 20 to 40 being tier 2, over 40 to 60 being tier 3, over 60 to 80 being tier 4, and then over 80 to 100 being tier 5, which, if you were to implement, would also mean you wouldn't have veterans filing all the claims, because
additional claims trying to get that last 10 or 20%
because functionally anybody over 80% from a realistic point of view is functionally impaired to the point that civilian employment without a great deal of accommodation or flexibility just is not feasible. And so specifying between 83 and 88 and 92 and 97% is more of a bureaucratic exercise, not an actual one regarding veterans' health and their ability to function.
That's a good point. Well, I really appreciate the time you've given us today, Everett. I thought the opinion piece did just that, made people think about it. I wanted to give a broader platform to it so that people can maybe understand a little bit, and if they get a chance, talk to their congressman or congresswoman and sort of say, don't be afraid of fixing the system. There's some flaws in it. It's an old 1945 model. We can do better. Sure, there's inertia, but you've given us some good ideas to think about. Again, Everett, thanks for your time today for Veterans Radio.
I appreciate it, Ms. Jim. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, NVBDC.org, VA Ann Arbor Health Care System, the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettles Chapter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423 in Ann Arbor, and the American Legion Press Corn Post 46, also in Ann Arbor.